DB, are you gonna be running the shindig or
What's the topic?
cosmic horror?
I am
Robert E.
literally going
Howard.
to hang up right now. What's the
Cosmic horror in
topic?
video games, I know.
One
Cosmic
question.
horror in comic books, I know. Is that it? Is that the one that we're doing?
No.
No.
It's about no DB. We lied. This is an intervention.
Yes.
Robert E. Howard. Okay.
Okay.
All right. What's the official title of it?
The cosmic horror of Robert E. Howard.
All right. All right. Okay. So, welcome everyone once again to another panel at the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival in Cthulhu Con. This year it is David Heath, Ken Hite, and Scott Glancy in no particular order. Just, a bunch of guys talking about Robert E. Howard and the Cthulhu mythos today here. How's everyone doing?
Great.
Excellent.
Wow.
Good. Good to hear. Good to hear. And
Glad to be here, time traveling into the future to be at the festival.
yeah.
Not that far in the future.
Yeah.
Well, this time travel in we're just taking baby steps.
All right, fair enough.
Avoiding
Everyone's first time
Nadelos.
travel is their first time travel. I shouldn't, be snotty just because I do it like every other week.
Look, you're subsidized by Time Incorporated. The rest of us have to get by with whatever gizmos we can put together using.
That's why there's a hyphen between pro and am, Scott. That's what's going on.
Get the business model, not the home model, is what I found.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. The business. First of all, there's no ads. That's nice.
Yep.
Anyway, yes, we're all happy to be here. At least I'm happy. Scott's happy. I assume David's happy. He was
Or what
discoursing earlier on
passes
his
for
happiness.
happy.
Right.
Passes
Fair enough.
for what happiness in my case.
Right. And DB, you're you just have to look at you to see how happy you are, for gosh sakes.
Yeah.
It's written all over your blue face.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes. I'm just happy that I didn't have to get oral surgery today. So, all right.
Hurrah!
Yeah.
We were wondering how the panel moderator was going to moderate after having had a piece of their jaw removed.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
The best panels are moderated while on Vicodin. I think we all know this.
Correct.
Yes. Speaking of Vicodin and bad segues, we're talking about Robert E. Howard.
You often wrote about the ancient Vicodins.
Oh yeah. Yes.
That was the devil coming to collect Scott.
So, my first thought when we, the question was, cosmic horror and Robert E. Howard. I mean, he's got a little out there. He's got more than a few stories that dabble in it. Although, bottom line, Bob Howard still thinks you can punch cosmic horror.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I guess, the fundamental question is, barring the Black Stone, which is clearly his most Lovecraftian story.
How about Dig Me No Grave?
Does Howard, Dig Me No Grave, if I recall correctly, is still, I mean, there's qualities to it.
They solve the problem by fleeing.
Right. It's a little more adventurous, but yeah, let's throw Dig Me No Grave on that small pile. But most of them, as you say, Scott, imply that there are things that matter, that it is not a matter of an implacable, impersonal, irresistible universe that will destroy us, but that this destruction, even if it is inevitable, that fighting back against it is worthy. And in Lovecraft, you see that to an extent, whenever Providence is threatened, right? You see it in Charles Dexter Ward.
Yeah. You
see it in The Shunned House. You see it in Dunwich Horror, the only Arkham story where that really happens. Do you think that we can read Howard in to cosmic horror merely on the notion that these dangers are larger than humanity and possibly extra dimensional? I mean, because Howard again is talking about civilization as a fundamental danger to humanity through virtually all of his works. Civilization's bigger than people. Civilization doesn't care about you. Is Howard's barbarian ethos, are we stretching the point too much if we say that's a cosmic horror? Because that, I think, is the real stumbling block when talking about Howard doing cosmic horror, because outside the one or two pastiches, he's not in sympathy with it in the way that Lovecraft is, or even in the way that even Derleth, I think, has got more cosmicity in him than Howard does. What do we think?
The one I would give in spirit, though, to this would be Silence Falls on Mecca's Walls. Where, yes, it comes here to Earth, but I that was like one of the first mythos things that I'd ever read.
I'd also throw in with this Valley of the Worm does have a whole lot of Siegfried in it, and he flat out calls out things like Siegfried, the hero who fights the monster. He's the thing that certainly the main character is done in by the end, having taken on the giant ancient unnatural horror. But he also takes out the unnatural horror, which is the thing that sort of, again, he punched it. It cost him his life, but, people will sing songs about you, so it's okay, in Howard's.
Right.
The one place that it veers closer to cosmic horror is the theme that both Lovecraft and Howard share, and that is that the world is unimaginably more ancient than we've previously imagined, and certainly they are growing up in a period where we're getting some changes in our cosmology about how old things are and how ancient things are. The world is older and more horrifying than we ever knew, and that there are these unnatural survivors from earlier epochs that are still flopping around, waiting to roll over us, like they rolled over our ancestors back in the day when we called them gods. That sort of aspect is there in a lot of his stuff, but it's rarely cosmic. You made the comment that, yes, he sees civilization as this thing that's bigger than the individual. He's a guy who called, not inaccurately, the Roman Empire organized crime on a continental level, and he does see this as the individual being mashed by larger forces, but he still provides a ethos where throwing a punch before they roll you over is still worth it. There's still something to that.
It's still meaningful.
Yeah, and I think the classic example of this is going to be found, or the difference between Howard and Lovecraft is Challenge from Beyond, where Howard basically changes the character and his personality from what Lovecraft gave him before.
Yeah, but that's the problem with every exquisite corpse. There's a lot of yes and then that's what you're stuck with.
And in case maybe people who are watching this aren't familiar with the Challenge Beyond, that was a round robin writing project for, I think it was Fantasy Magazine.
Fantasy Fan, I think.
Fantasy Fan, thank you. Where C.L. Moore, Robert E. Howard, Lovecraft, and a few others each wrote a section.
A. Merritt and Frank Belknap Long round us out.
And I think that's kind of their difference there, is you see where Lovecraft writes this guy who's going to accept the universe, and then when he gets his chapter, Howard is like, wait a minute, I'm a Texan, or I'm a human being from Earth. I'm going to start hitting things.
And Howard's human-souled entity conquers the planet Yakub and overthrows its corrupt civilization, and with nothing but good old human know-how and brute force.
Yeah.
Because he's immune to the Yakubians' mind tricks by being a human now. I think that if you're looking for Howard directly refuting Lovecraft, I think that's the closest you can get. But I think you can also look, interestingly, at his responses in, for example, Children of the Night, or some of these stories where you have basically the same rats in the walls type setup, where you have a ancient, corrupt belief system underlying Britain. And in Howard's case, if you have some sort of slithering alien monstrosity, it is your job to smack it, even in its reincarnated normal human form. Or in the distant past, where Bran McMorran says, "I will do a deal with Cthulhu if it takes out these Romans." You use it, you fight it, you reverse it. Whereas in Rats in the Walls, literally merely discovering this truth, sends you toppling backwards through the atavistic levels of your mind, and you eat poor, Mr. Norris next to you. And so in a way, Howard is presenting the human side, and Lovecraft is presenting the alien side. For someone who is as xenophobic as Lovecraft, a lot of his characters, because Lovecraft couldn't imagine anything scarier than discovering you already had this in you, a lot of his characters are in fact the other. Whereas Howard's characters, despite Howard being vastly less xenophobic than Lovecraft, Howard's characters are always fighting the other. And you have to look long and hard, maybe to Black Canaan, or People Across the River. What is it? People Across the River? Something Across the River? The great Conan going across the Black River with the Picts, to find a sort of a sympathy for the other in Howard. That's much harder to find. Whereas in Lovecraft, he's always writing it, because to the extent his characters attract your sympathy at all, which you can argue back and forth, but Olmsted, I think, becomes a sympathetic character in Shadow over Innsmouth. Certainly, Delaporte does in Rats in the Walls. And then they're overmastered by this, Arthur German, similarly. They're overmastered by this discovery of alienness. And so it's not as simple as saying, Lovecraft faints, Howard punches, because Lovecraft is also looking at it from the alien viewpoint in a way that Howard almost never does, and I maybe even never does. I want to toss back at everyone. We can respond to what I just said, but I want to talk about Skullface, because I don't think people talk about Skullface enough. And we can all say, no, it's not cosmic. Shut up, Ken. It's just Sax Romer again. But
no, I was actually going to bring it up as an example of some cosmic in it too.
Well, it's the same, but it's the same cosmic theme of the world is more ancient than we know, and there are these survivors that are going to, from a time when other things and other forces ruled this earth, that perhaps haven't quite given up on their plans for, ruling the earth, despite the fact these upstart monkeys are running the show right now, and sort of,
although even that I think overstates Howard's embrace of deep time. Most of his ancient civilizations are maybe hundreds of thousands of years old.
Yeah.
Yes.
And even the Velusian serpent men are down in historical time when they're introduced.
Yeah. But at the same time, and Cthulhu's is and Skullface is pretty. My read on it was that it's pretty solidly. Oh no, brown people. As far as it's people of the past coming forward to overthrow civilization, it's very much that's. It's even more problematic to me than some of Sax Romer's stuff. In that, all the forces that Cthulhu's the Atlantean is surrounding himself with are Africans, Middle Easterners,
Well, it's because
subcontinental Indians.
And I mean, that's because of the
Asian.
notion of the war against the white race, which is
Yeah.
Sax Rohmer's notion, which of course comes out of, the old eugenicists' notions back before, and that Lovecraft, toys with and out of the eons when it's the Pacific Ocean, not the Atlantic
Yeah.
Ocean, but it's still, not decent Massachusetts folk that are out there worshiping a mummy. But the war against the white race trope itself gets deployed. I mean, first of all, it gets deployed by Chinese authors and Japanese authors at the time, and you also see it deployed by people like Schuyler when he writes Black Emperor about the justified rebellion of Africa against colonial Europe. And while obviously Schuyler is sympathetic to Belsidus, his mad scientist, and Howard means Cathulos to be scary, and because Cathulos is more of a cipher, I think he's even less sympathetic than Fu Manchu, if that's how I can read your objection, Scott.
I do think so.
Yeah. I mean, in the same way that Shakespeare gives Shylock some good lines before punishing him, Romer gives Fu Manchu some good lines, and Skullface is so early in Howard's writing career that he just doesn't have the chops, I think, to make Skullface a character as opposed to a symbol. Good old Cathulos, God bless him.
And I liked the story. I enjoyed reading it, but I was thinking, if I had written this, the good guys would have been the other people. I mean, it would have been the rebels.
I'm super happy. I mean, the setup for it is fantastic. I love the sarcophagus that floats from the bottom of the ocean only to be picked up, adrift in the sea, and then you release the ancient horror that has been pent up in it. That's chef's kiss as far as setups from Lost Atlantis, and as sort of aesthetically as a bad guy, being the alchemist, scientist, sorcerer / lich. That's fantastic. These are all the things I want from a creepy mastermind villain in a pulp story. They're all great. The only cosmic things, and I hate to. It's what Ken dropped the term deep time, and that's the term I suppose we should have been using about this theme. But even Howard's deep time, you're right, isn't as deep.
Yeah.
Is Lovecraft's. Howard's deep time is, and it's also very terrestrial. I mean, in the Tower of the Elephant, there's a alien creature
exactly
who has been imprisoned by this wizard in Zamora, and he's and has been exploited, and Conan frees him, and allows the creature to get revenge, I guess, before fucking back off to the cosmos. That entity has certain, there's certain cosmic, that's maybe the most cosmic scale story I can think of with Howard, maybe, because it involves something that is absolutely not from here in a very physical way, as opposed to maybe something from another dimension. I mean, yes, there are some ugly dimensional critters that turn up in Howard stuff, but that one struck me as even more as maybe the most alien.
I agree.
Stories, despite the fact that our critter is very talky and able to converse and make itself plain to our Sumerian hero. Its origins are perhaps the most removed from mankind. Most of everything with Howard seems to be very terrestrially locked. He doesn't go to a lot of other worlds, except suddenly I'm thinking of wait a minute. Is Almuric Howard or Edgar Rice Burroughs? Almuric, there's a maybe I'm getting that. Maybe that's an Edgar Rice Burroughs. It's a planetary romance that I'm suddenly confusing with Howard. Never mind, I'll back off of that. But most of the time, Howard doesn't leave terra firma.
Yeah, he did have a planetary romance, but it didn't last very long.
Yeah.
I don't remember the name of the character.
Almuric is the name of the world. I mean, I'll look that up while somebody else continues to
So
rhapsodic
get
about.
really quick back to Ken, and I realize this is completely cosmetic, but isn't that how Howard and Lovecraft met? Was the people were comparing Skullface to Call of Cthulhu, and I realize it's a very surface level, but isn't that how they met?
No, they met because Lovecraft cribbed the dying words of Delapore out of a story by Fiona MacLeod, and he said, "I need ancient Celtic. That's ancient Celtic. I'll put it in." And then Howard wrote, and he said, "It's interesting that you hold to the mostly discredited theory that the Britons spoke a form of Gaelic as opposed to Brythonic, ancient Welsh. What's your justification for this?" And Lovecraft copped to it because he was generally pretty fair about admitting when he was out over his skis. But then the two of them began their sort of pen pal friendship. And I think someone had asked Howard earlier, "Hey, is Cathulos Lovecraft's Cthulhu?" And he says, "Nope, I don't think so." But of course, he writes Skullface after Call of Cthulhu sees print. So the question is, did he read Call of Cthulhu and then just have that, syllable pattern banging around in his head?
And I believe he said he did actually have the Strange Tales or whatever that issue. He just didn't read.
Yeah, he had that Weird Tales. I mean, he'd been reading Lovecraft, for a long time, and it was only the reprint of Rats on the Walls that made him say, finally I can, actually one of my idols, because Twitter is a state of mind, not a software. And instead of responding "shut up, jerk," Lovecraft responded with a 10-page letter because H.P. Lovecraft.
Nice.
Yeah, a quick check tells me that Almuric was sold after Howard dropped dead. It turns up in Weird Tales serialized. It is a planetary romance of some sort, but that's the only time I can think of Bob getting off planet Earth. It's very much in the ERB. I'm going to put you in a machine and pull a lever, and poof, you're magically on another planet. No spaceships, no rockets. Bam, you're in on another planet. Now you can have adventures.
And of course there is the theory that it was actually mostly by Howard or partially by Howard, and that Otis Adelbert Klein finished it up to get a sale. And
that never happened
in the grand tradition of people writing their own inferior stuff and ascribing it to Robert E. Howard. Otis Klein at least, was there first, I guess. But maybe it was just Howard having an off day, or writing something uncharacteristically.
There's a reason why it was unsold at the time of his death. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, right.
I'm always pleased by the fact that Howard would sit on these manuscripts and go, "Well, that didn't work.
Yeah.
How can I make it better?" And he'd come back later and, well, maybe it's a Conan story this time, or maybe it's not a Conan story. They would always find a way to gussy up an old manuscript and get another whirl. It's one of my favorite things about his professionalism. That just because it's a bad idea this week doesn't mean I can't sell it next month. But anyways, a lot of I think we're coming to an agreement that much of Howard's so-called may have cosmic themes and deep time themes, but to embrace it as part of cosmic horror is a little difficult, because he's sort of it never quite rises to the kind of nihilism that embraces the utter futility of the other, maybe not futility, but how about pointlessness of human existence, that we're an accident or a joke, we're here temporarily. It looks like a long time to us, but it doesn't mean anything to the cosmos. He never really cashes in on this. He has some stories where the characters are absolutely at the mercy of some of this stuff, like the Blackstone, like
the Thing on the Roof.
The Thing on the Roof was, yes, I was about to bring up, the Thing on the Roof is absolutely something that you cannot confront. Character chooses not to confront it. There's no gunfight with whatever flies up from South America to do him. our archaeologist. But even so, a lot of this feels more like window dressing and aesthetic than sort of a real buy-in to human.
I mean, some of it is just the fun of being friends with H.P. Lovecraft.
Yeah.
And some of it is that Weird Tales was buying Cthulhu fiction for a brief, beautiful window. And as you say, his professionalism was leading him to write that kind of story. But I think that
market.
very clearly he starts to rebel against the stricture of see horrible thing, be unable to do anything about it. And he did It Was a Dream. He did It Was Too Scary. He did It Happened in the Deep Past. Then he was sort of out of ways to not fight it. And so even in something that is, I think, a little more, a little larger scope, something like Gods of Balsagoth, he still wants to be there in the mix. So, even though the fundamental structure of Balsagoth is you see this horrible island ruled by a horrible god, the island is destroyed and you're picked up by a passing Viking ship or whatever it is. But in the middle, we still have to have a fight and put a beautiful princess back on the throne, right? We can't do nothing. And so you get the sense that Howard is thinking of these, great super scope histories that Lovecraft would put on the walls of things, the Mountains of Madness or Shadow Out of Time or Nameless City. And he'd say, yeah, all right, fine, I get it. But down there in that corner, there's a guy stabbing a guy. I want to hear about that. And even if, in the larger picture, the story of some heroic elder thing breaking the back of the Shoggoth Rebellion doesn't matter, Howard still wants to tell that story because to his, way of thinking, it does matter, even though, and Howard is the first to say, even though whatever you're fighting for will be destroyed, the fact that you fought for it makes a metaphysical difference than if you just rolled over.
Well,
and
valor pleases you, Crom.
Right, exactly.
So, that's what we're going to get is standing against odds because they're odds to be stood against. I keep thinking of Anthony Hopkins in The Lion in Winter, where he says, what does the fall matter? What does it matter how you fall? And it's like, well, that's all that's left. It's all that matters is how you fall. And certainly that's Howard embraces that completely. It is like, sure, yeah, we're going to go ahead and throw a punch at the Shoggoth because that's the option that's left.
Yep.
And
I think
very alien to Howard, but I mean to H.P. Lovecraft, Howard Phillips, but it's a matter also of Howard Phillips Lovecraft grew up being not the healthiest guy on the block. The idea of physical solution to a problem is completely outside of his experience.
Although, of course, if you read his letters where he talks about, being one with the blood drinking chalk white Nordic raiders of the past or whatever. And, he's as ridiculous in those letters as Howard is, except Howard, as you say, has actually been in a fight ever. And so, the interesting thing is that Lovecraft's self-conception, all of his self-conceptions, have to give way to the imperatives of his fiction, right? So the Lovecraft stand-in character is always destroyed, right? I mean, George Gamble Angel is his aspirational self. Henry Wilcox is his self. They both lose it. They're both gone. Charles Dexter Ward is himself. He's disintegrated by Kerwin. All of his fictional selves are destroyed for the sin, generally, of behaving like Lovecraft would tell them to. So, I'm going to investigate this weird mystery. Well, that was a horrible mistake. Now you're dead. Whereas Howard, as we can argue back and forth about how much more realistic his self-conception is, but Howard's characters are not punished for their ideology or for ascribing to Howard's ideology. Conan is right to be supporting barbarism over civilization. He wins. He becomes king.
They're rewarded.
Conan. And Howard's, bold Shoggoth punching heroes, they generally don't die. They flee or whatever. But if you chop a reincarnated serpent man in the face, you're going to go to jail for it. But by God, you chop that guy in the face, and that's a good thing. And so that differential, even though Howard succeeds on so many other levels that Lovecraft doesn't, the differential of Lovecraft being able to step outside himself in service of what makes to him a philosophically satisfying story, it's an interesting difference. And I think it's one of the things that, as you read their correspondence, Robert E. and Howard P. kind of get under each other's skin a little bit. I mean, they're going back and forth about civilization versus barbarism, and Howard is saying, look, we're all racist. We don't have to be super racist. That's weird. And, they've got all these differentials, and Lovecraft keeps saying the way to write fiction is about philosophy. And at some point, Howard is like, I've sold an order of magnitude more words than you have, Lovecraft. Stop telling me how to write.
Right, yeah.
And it sort of gets up his nose, and I think it gets up Lovecraft's nose a little bit too, that Howard is no longer the supplicant that, and he's not like he was mad at him or whatever, but I feel like there's a reason that Howard sort of put the Cthulhu mythos behind him in about a year, and then went on to write boxing stories and Oriental Adventures and all the other stuff that he could sell. Whereas Lovecraft couldn't put the Cthulhu mythos behind him. He'd try to write more accessible works, and they would just die on the vine, because for him it was impossible to not write something that I don't want to say challenged, but in many ways stood against his self-conception and defeated it and was bigger than him. And Howard, because he was larger than life in certainly in his affect, I think that his fictions never really exceeded Howard in that way. And it's not to say that Howard is a worse writer than Lovecraft, because that's clearly the Gustavus. But I think that the project of the two of them is interesting when you compare it, and the way that Lovecraft's characters die for agreeing with Lovecraft, and Howard's characters, win valor by agreeing with Howard.
Yeah.
And I think a really good,
even when they die in the end, there's
right.
There's different ways of defining your win.
Mm-hmm.
With Howard, and getting killed is not part of the problem.
Right.
That's not losing. Surrendering. Giving up, accepting, well, I got Superman blood, I guess I better start worshiping Yig, or helping overthrow humanity, what with my Superman blood. That doesn't work with Howard's characters. I mean, one of the best parts of Skullface I like is the fact that our protagonist starts off as one of the evil masterminds, mooks. That is a great entry into the story, is that he has surrendered to this greater force and devoted himself to it, has become a slave, I guess, in some sense. And the barbarian won't permit that. The barbarian always sets fire to their owner's house and leaves, is happy to leave in its loincloth and sandals rather than whatever finery that they had when they were a slave, to either an individual master or to civilization. Better to track off into the wilderness than to have to put on pants every morning and go to an office job. That's that's throughout the writings. They have not gotten all the way through the Lovecraft Howard letters, but there are some choice. Howard has some choice words for civilization and what Lovecraft imagines civilization to be, especially one of my favorites on the topic of the police, when Howard talks about what are the police for, versus what H.P. Lovecraft thinks they are for. It's clear that Howard has a better conception of they're there to protect stuff and money, so that's it. If you don't have those things, you're not on the protect and serve list. It's far. I mean, obviously the individual. I mean, obviously, the Howard's more individualistic than Lovecraft, and finds value in the individual. Where Lovecraft, perhaps because he's got maybe a better sense of perspective, or at least his perspective is cosmic. He's like individual. What does that do? That's it. The individual has absolutely no effect on that kind of scale.
That, and I think seeing into that is also the fact that Howard is this incredible creator of characters. And I think that's one of the reasons why he focuses on this, because he writes such great characters.
Yeah, I mean, I don't completely buy into the Howard just wrote one character and put him in all these different
No, I don't either. But I think that Lovecraft, it's almost like he would love to tell a story without characters, I think.
Yeah.
I think if Lovecraft could just tell a story without characters, he would. Where I think Howard's
weirdly that actually made adapting a lot of Howard Lovecraft stuff to role-playing games easier, because the idea of inserting player as protagonist gets a lot easier when Lovecraft's protagonists are just these machines for delivering details of the environment and the plot,
or are clearly self-inserts in the same way that your role-playing character is. I mean, I've always and everywhere taught that the Cthulhu mythos is by far the best suited game setting for exactly that reason. Whereas if you play in the Hyborian era, you always know, well, I can screw around here, but eventually, I mean, Conan's the real guy. Yeah, Conan's the important one.
If I run across Conan and there's a tug of war over a jewel we're both stealing, I'm going to lose. I don't want to lose to Conan.
Whereas, I mean, even Randolph Carter doesn't have that effect in the Lovecraft universe.
No.
It isn't a thing. And there's a wild disparity there, given that they're both writing for the same market, given that they're for a while doing the same sort of thing. And I do think that Howard's characters are, leagues better than Lovecraft's, or leagues more real than Lovecraft's, leagues more human. I don't know that I would say character is his great strength. I think his great strength is incident and action. And I think that, if you can write, 2 boxing matches and they're both interesting and they're different, you are doing more than most people can do. And Howard wrote dozens of boxing matches, all different, all interesting.
Just the Steve Costigan ones, not all the rest, but just the Steve Costigan ones. I was shocked that he could manage to make another boxing match interesting.
Yeah, it's and that I think is, and to some extent, David, you're right that part of that is because we care about the characters involved, or at least one of the characters involved in the fight. But I think another part of it is he just makes the fight vastly more interesting, in the same way that Lovecraft is able to make the sort of travelogue part of his stories amazingly interesting. And it's why we're still consumed with, which one is Kingsport and where is it? And is that street the same? In a way that, I mean, I don't think Faulkner people are like going back and forth in Mississippi arguing about which county is Yaknatapafa, right?
Neshoba.
Yeah, but thank you.
I lived in Neshoba County for 6 months. Yeah,
but I feel like that ability that Howard has with incident and action is part of why he privileges acting as a moral stance, because he believes it's important and therefore he's good at describing it. Is maybe, I don't know which way the causality runs, but I think that, when you say that the action is the important thing, Scott, not the outcome, I think you have absolutely keyed in on what Howard thought, and it's why he wrote the way that he wrote and what he wrote. And to some extent, yes, you can tell Cull from Bran from Conan, but to another extent, I think what we remember more is, what they do, their arcs, than themselves, in a way.
The biting the throat out of the
vulture.
The vulture in a witch shall be born. I'm not sure what else happened in A Witch Shall Be Born, but I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember him biting the throat out of while he's crucified.
Yep.
Attacks the vulture that's come to feast on him.
This is so the vultures are there. How close are they getting? I don't know. Are they getting within a yard of me? Well, I suppose they're going to have to come down to peck your eyes out. So sure, I bite his throat out. All right, roll bite, I guess.
Something
that's a very player character move.
Oh, yeah. Something that's always struck me as a very kind of RPG role-playing game moment in a Robert Howard story is in The Black Stone, where it's like, well, how'd they get rid of it? Well, a bunch of guys with scimitars blessed by Mohammed showed up and they chopped up the frog monster, and then they left. Oh, okay. I mean, it just seems like they had a magical item, they used it.
Was it a +2 scimitar or +1? Was there a minimum plus level to affect the?
It's just holy. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Scimitar of smiting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sharpness. Yes. Yes. Apparently, Suleiman or whoever the court magister, certainly fixed that little red wagon, at least temporarily.
Yeah, and again, this is an example, I guess, of what we were talking about. We opened this whole bit by saying, all right, yes, Blackstone is clearly a Lovecraftian story. We have a poetic self-insert who's sort of a weak-kneed sissy, and he goes to find this magic Blackstone after doing a lot of research in a crumbly old book, and then he falls asleep, and he dreams a horrible dream, and he wakes up, and he's crazy after that. And it's like, that's a Lovecraft story. Right, nailed it. But, of course, as you point out, DB, in the story, in the dream, there's still got to be a sword fight.
Oh, yeah.
Right? We don't just see an alien. We don't just see, a shining trapezohedron being, reverenced by serpent men. Nope. We see a frickin' sword fight and a lady tied to an altar and all kinds of cool stuff. Incident, as I said, not just the sort of cosmic revelation that if Lovecraft had written that exact same story and Howard said, hey man, I've got to go, drive Novel and Price to the movies. Could you just write the dream sequence? If Lovecraft had done it, it would not have been that. Yeah. It would have been, shadowy congeners, floating around the circle and calls to an alien god in syllables that break the mind or something. It would not have been a sword fight and a lady. None of that would have happened.
Yeah. But I think that he, in some ways, saw this as Lovecraftian because he used Arkham Sanitarium. Yeah. That's the first place Arkham Sanitarium appears. So he may have been trying to get his friend to like him, but I think maybe subconsciously he saw this as part of Lovecraft's greater world.
No, he absolutely saw it as Lovecraft's part of Lovecraft's greater work. I don't think there's any doubt. I mean, he is the first author to use, I think is it Cthulhu? It's Cthulhu and something else in a story besides Lovecraft. I mean, he is, Frank Belknap Long does the Space Eaters, but that's the Necronomicon. It doesn't have any of the other magic names in it. I think there may be a Ia in there, but Howard is the first guy who says, your God, my story, let's make it happen. And
is I'm totally blanking. Is Cthulhu name dropped in the Black Stone or the thing on the roof? Which one is it?
Well, let me look it up.
And while we're on the topic of Ia, you said there may be an Ia in there. Does anyone have any etymology on where the phrase Ia shows up? Because at some point in the speaking of pulpy things that are way too tinged with white supremacy, the 36 film Mask of Fu Manchu has Myrna Loy as Fu Manchu's daughter belting out Ia during a sequence in the film, and I'm like, did Ia make it to film, or is this something that Lovecraft looked at from someplace else? Because I genuinely want to know. I have not been able to find anything that has told me. It is well accepted thing for cultists to belt out when they're super excited. And again, it was a little strange to see Myrna Loy do it. Mask of Fu Manchu. Anybody?
As far as I was able to tell, Ia is Lovecraft's coinage. I've never seen it before him. And he takes it from a Latin exclamation EO, which appears in Ovid and lots of other places. and from Evoe, which is in Greek poetry, amongst them the Bacchantes, the Bacchae, and other plays. And he takes, I think, the umlaut from Evoe and swaps A in for I and makes it Ia. Now, there is also a possibility that he ran across IAO, Iao, as a magical exclamation, which appears in an Arthur Machen story that Lovecraft, I don't know that he read, in Chronicle of Clemendi. And that Machen got from the Golden Dawn. So the possibility, in my mental canon, he took Iao from Machen, Evoe with the umlaut from the Bacchae from Euripides, and Io from Ovid, and he's like, what's the secret noise that's under all those three things? And he made up Ia. Now, I have, if someone turns up some, Oliver Onion story with Ia in it, I'm willing to say, well, look, I was wrong, but I haven't seen it. And I think Lovecraft did it. And if, there's not subtitles in Mask of Fu Manchu or whatever. So Myrna Loy's not, putting the umlaut in. She's not drawing it on a chalkboard, I assume.
No.
So it might be something like, they're trying to do Iao and she's not pronouncing it. Or, Lovecraft was EIing all over the place in the 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
The scriptwriter could have said, that sounds creepy. Let's have her shout that.
Yeah. It's an odd moment. I've never quite been able to suss out. Yeah, and I suppose I could engage the
Yep. The Children of the Night, by the way, is the first published
Okay.
story that includes Cthulhu and also Yog-Sothoth for a bonus, not by Lovecraft.
Okay.
So.
Sure. Next question.
Yeah. DB, what's the next question?
I'm all out of quarters right now. Hold on. All right. I don't know, Dave. Did you have any other questions or any points of talking about that you wanted to cover?
No, I just, I see these two people in a lot of ways, I think, completely different, and that we get more from two different perspectives than just say one, if that makes sense.
Are you talking about Scott and me or Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft?
Yes.
Yes. No. Okay. So which one of you is Howard? Which one?
Well, I think Scott is the one who can win a fight, so I'm pretty sure that Scott must be Howard.
You
did suggest that if your wife was planning to do you in, you would just kind of sigh, and accept your fate. So that does sound a bit like, I guess I'm a deep one now.
I guess so. What are you gonna do? Gonna dive in and swim down the Yanath and live in wonder and glory forever? I guess. Whatever. Eat my fat buddy.
Yes. Yeah. But no, I appreciate sort of both perspectives from both of you, but also from both of the writers. And then if this makes no sense, it makes it more three-dimensional to me. Yeah. And I don't know that you get to see a depth and a perception that you wouldn't see with just one eye.
Now that I sort of wonder if we have any instances in Lovecraft stories where somebody takes the Howard approach, I'm going to punch it, and comes to naught. And the only thing I can think of are those 10 state cops who go wandering off into Dunwich armed to the teeth, and nobody finds anything except their cars.
I was gonna say Shadow over Innsmouth, when he tries to escape out. I mean, he's not fighting, but he's trying to run away.
Yeah, the escape scene. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the specific fighting but losing. I mean, I don't know to what extent you want to say the sailors on Relia fought when Cthulhu grabbed them.
Yeah.
They do.
I mean, certainly,
they take out the cultists, and then
Elihu Whipple fights against the thing in the shunned house and loses. He gets sucked into a vampire cloud.
Detective Legrassi.
Yeah, I mean, Detective, he doesn't lose. He wins.
Yeah, that's it. He wins.
Right.
So
I mean, he's Robert E. Howard running around there in the swamps, fighting foreigners, and keeping it real. Yeah, it's easier to find Lovecraft characters whose action does make a difference than it is to find, I think, Lovecraft characters who fight back and nothing happens. I mean, you get a little of that with like Henry Akeley, letting off shotguns against the Migo when they besiege him. One assumes that didn't help. But his dogs do, like, I think, nearly kill one of them. So, 6-1, and then they overwhelm him, Dark of the Moon, sorry, game's over. So I think there's a couple of cases on the sort of edge, but again, Lovecraft doesn't care about action. I mean, you're either you're being torn to pieces, or you're running away, or very rarely you're solving the problem in some other fashion. I mean, Marinus Willett, is literally the guy that armors up and goes after Kerwin, but the first time he tries it, he falls into the pit and nearly goes crazy, and then the second time he's got the spell and he just says it. He doesn't have to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
So, the privileging of action per se is either off screen, as Scott mentioned with Dunwich Horror, or it's not even a thing, not even being considered because it's impossible. Like in Color Out of Space, for example, there's nothing to punch. It's a color.
Or even in the terrestrial level, like Randolph Carter, we hear about his war efforts, but not in detail.
Yeah, well, he's driving an ambulance. He's not, he's not a soldier, right?
He's wounded.
Yeah,
he's wounded though.
Artillery.
Yeah, I feel like we tend to hear about what happens, the action scenes in Lovecraft stories. Like, we have a bunch of scientists go back to their camp and discover all these clues that lead them to something else horrible, as opposed to, and then the thing swung at me with its 5 fists.
Yeah, I mean, you got a fight scene in Horror in the Museum.
Yeah.
I just realized that our steely Prussian officer in the temple is all man of action, unbroken will, and it leads to naught. I mean, he doesn't get anything out of that deal.
But he doesn't try to torpedo the city even.
No.
Yeah.
So he doesn't fight back. He just yells in his diary.
Yes, that's true. And occasionally,
I mean, I think he executes some sailors for being mutinous dogs.
A bunch of disobedient sailors, but before finally stomping off in his deep sea diving suit to get a look at the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But even in I'm going to go to the temple, it's not like I'm going to take the warhead off of the torpedo and lug it into the temple.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That'll show him, and then there's nothing even like that. He's just going to go, I must see, I must know at the end, as opposed to, I'm going to take a pointless punch at the monster that has clearly undone me before I run out of oxygen or, whatever. So even he's not, you're right. He's not really dealing with action.
Yeah, I think some cats kick some ass and
But again, they win, right?
Times.
The losing fight is not a thing that Lovecraft, you lose or you fight, and you seldom fight, but the cats beat up the cats from Saturn, but they win. They're good.
Don't they use a flamethrower on the Bardston house up in upstate New York? The creepy, the Lurking.
You mean in Lurking Fear?
Yeah, Lurking Fear.
They dynamite it.
Okay.
Yeah.
The flamethrower is in Shunned House.
Even Sarnath doesn't really fight back.
No, they don't have a chance.
Yeah.
They're just surprised at the big party.
Yep.
And the moon beasts crawl up and slurp everyone. The armies of Sarnath are as nothing.
Yep. So yeah, again, we're still on the same track. We're just pulling up our little anecdotal evidence of it.
Mm-hmm.
Lovecraft does not see action as the losing fight doesn't get a lot of attention. There's no glory in it. First of all, you lost. I mean, he doesn't see the exercise of valor does not matter. Perhaps success does, because he has certain characters who succeed using violence, like LaGrasse, or even the U.S. military in Innsmouth. Some partial success.
Yeah.
But
those only success that they let you have.
But possibly. But even so, the fight for the sake of I'm not going down without one does not come up with does not come up with Howard the way it, and the thing is, of course, Robert E. Howard, it's always, well, I might as well go down with a fight and then wins. It's very rare that there's a I'm not gonna just lay down and take it. It almost universally works, because you rolled the dice is better than not rolling the dice.
Yeah. And also because he's structurally, someone has to survive to tell the story, and it might as well be the hero.
Yeah.
Howard does not have a lot of found amongst the papers of self-insert dead guy PhD the way that Lovecraft does.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of these are my last words as I hold a gun to my mouth, or as the heroin courses or opium courses through my system. At the window, it claws,
Perhaps he was giving dictation as the monster ate him.
Right. Yep. Like Vanderheil, like taking notes in his diary as he's being dragged into the cellar.
So I did realize something right now at the end, because I always think of things at the end. We have not introduced ourselves. So maybe instead of credits, it's just people that maybe don't recognize us, like my family. Hello, hi, it's me.
They're looking at the same video that I'm looking at. There's our names at least on the screen.
Yeah, so maybe would you guys like to maybe share anything with that you're working on or projects that you have?
That's a good plan. As Ken looks at the mountain of teetering research threatening to.
Yep. I'm Kenneth Hite. I'm a tabletop role-playing game designer. I designed the game Trail of Cthulhu. I'm working eventually on a Hyperborean supplement for Swords of the Serpentine, the new Gumshoe Swords and Sorcery book based on the Hyperborean tales of Clark Ashton Smith, our own best buddy. Most recently, I'm the author of Tour to Lovecraft: The Destinations, the second volume in my Tour to Lovecraft series, available, one hopes, in the gift shop.
Excellent. I'm Scott Glancy. I'm a role-playing game writer. Sometimes also writer, mostly have space at the table because of the long-time success of Delta Green, which began as a supplement for the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game and eventually grew up to be its own standalone role-playing game. Delta Green. Get it at stores now. The most recent thing that's managed to produce is Delta Green Iconoclasts, which is a lovely story of what happens when the goons from ISIS go around smashing ancient artifacts, and then it turns out that artifacts actually work like they do in H.P. Lovecraft stories, as opposed to how they work in real life, which is they smash some big ones and sell the rest to the folks at Hobby Lobby.
As Lovecraft did.
Yeah. So there's that. Hopefully, I will be delivering Dog Soldiers to Shane Ivey over at Arc Dream Publishing, so that we will have a new Delta Green source book and adventure for a gussied up and revamped Cult of Nodens. Let's see if we can make Nodens a lot less boring than previously presented in some game material.
Thank you. And my name is David Heath, and I have a character named Farmer Dave. It's not really me, no, as co-host of the People's Guide to Cthulhu Mythos. And then our disembodied voice is...
I'm DB Spitzer. I am the ghost of General George Washington, apparently. And I also host People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos with David Heath, which has gone by many names, but generally is known as People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos. Find it wherever you find podcasts and loose miscellaneous blank tapes. So, yeah.
That seems correct.
All right. Thank you, everyone. This has been Something Something, Robert E. Howard, a panel.
Fine. The cat had some choice words to say there.
So opinions at the end.
Yeah.
Don't they always?
Yeah. Anyways, yes. It was a pleasure to hang out with you guys for an hour.
Yep. Great seeing
Thank
everybody.
you so much. I really do appreciate it.